Good evening and welcome to Metropolitan College of New York's official launch of its Men of Color Affinity Group. I'm David Hahn, Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at the college, and I'll serve as the technical producer of this webinar. Please note that this event is being recorded and that portions of it will be posted on the college's website and in its social media. Please post questions to our moderator and panelists in the chat. Ms. Tina Giorgio, the college's Director of Communications and Alumni Relations, and Ms. Kenya Kirkland, its Manager of Institutional Advancement, will manage them. Having covered these arrangements, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to your moderator of this evening's panel, my good and longtime colleague, Mr. Michael Goodwin. Mr. Goodwin is MCNY's Director of Employee Relations and Experiential Learning. Michael?
Good evening. I just need my video. David, if you can just put the video on. Thank you. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I would first like to thank everyone for joining us as we officially launch the MCNY Men of Color Affinity Group. I would like to take a brief moment to welcome some individuals who have registered to attend. Gary Jenkins, Board Chair for MCNY and an MCNY alum. I want to thank all faculty, staff, alumni, and students of MCNY for joining us this evening, and again, everyone else that's in attendance. The MCNY Affinity Group is an opportunity for MCNY male students, alum, faculty, and staff to meet in a group setting to discuss academic, personal, professional development with each other, discuss specific topics, guest speakers, opportunity to share resources, current students connect with alum and the community. The Men of Color Affinity Group mission is dedicated to fostering a community of cohesiveness, support, empowerment among men of color at MCNY. We are committed to cultivating an inclusive and nurturing environment that celebrates diversity, recognizes unique perspectives, and addresses the specific needs and challenges faced by men of color in higher ed. This panel is to launch our group. Here we will explore and unpack some of the issues surrounding the topic of low enrollment and retention of men of color in higher ed and identify strategies to address this grave disparity. I now have the honor of introducing a gentleman who I owe a great deal of thanks to and gratitude. I've been attempting to move this initiative forward for a couple of years. When he started his role as president of the college and he heard about this initiative, he responded, "Let's get it done." I now like to bring to you the 7th president of Metropolitan College of New York and the first African-American president and a man of color, Dr. Charles Gibbs. He will extend his welcome and his opening remarks. President Gibbs.
Top of the evening, colleagues, and Michael Goodwin, thank you so much. What a passion of love and commitment you have displayed since my administration began on July 1st. Today marks a very special occasion. We are officially 90 days into my term as the 7th president of this historic college called Metropolitan College of New York. Founded in 1964 by a courageous woman named Audrey Cohen, who had an idea to fight the war on poverty in this great city called New York. She was rebuffed. She was told no. She was told, "Who are you as a Caucasian woman who are going to start an institution for African-American women to fight the war on poverty?" In 1970, they protested on her, our current students at that time, and said, Who do you think you are? You do not know the plight of our own people. When the police arrived and they said, ma'am, do you want us to escort them off the campus? Do you want us to have them leave your office? She said, no. She said, I'm not concerned about my safety. I'm concerned about our programs that they're fighting to ensure we have equal access and resources to support them in leveling the playing field for equal access in education and in equity. 60 years later, this institution hired their first African-American president in the 60-year history of this great institution. It is a cultural shift that demonstrates the need for MCNY Men of Color Affinity Group. We are 73% women. We are 73% women. 85% of our population for undergraduate students are Black, African American, and Hispanic. There is no better time than now that we embrace our men of color at MCNY to balance the playing field, to allow the young brothers to realize there is a place for their voice, for their expertise, for their passion for higher ed, like no other place than MCNY. I take my hat off to this courageous faculty and staff at MCNY. We just received a $2.9 million grant from the National Science Foundation, specifically to support high density, impoverished areas, communities in New York City out of the 5 boroughs to put men of color, and I know Dr. Shu is listening, men of color, African American teachers in our school systems. As the former CEO and national CEO of 100 Black Men of America, our motto was very clear. What they see is what they'll be. So to the brothers that are on this call, the men who are embracing our students of color, we have a job to do. And on day one, Michael Goodwin, Alto Parker, Dr. Parker to be, Elliot Kerr, they met me on my interview and they saw me the day that I returned for commencement. And I said, I'm committed to this cause. We have a responsibility to open up our doors, to create mentoring programs, and to build a pipeline of not just the brothers that are currently enrolled in our institution, but those brothers that are coming behind us. We have a campus in the South Bronx, across from the Horizon Juvenile Detention Center. We have a campus on the lower Manhattan on 60 West Street. We need you who are participating in this call to invest in us in creating pipelines of success and of mentoring for the young brothers to come behind us. There are, from recent research, 1,000 young brothers and sisters in Brooklyn alone who don't have a high school diploma. What are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about those brothers and sisters that are aging out of the foster care system and don't have an education to turn to? Metropolitan College of New York is the resource. So this affinity group is not just in name to be pretty, but I'm looking for us to go to work. I'm looking for us to go into our community. I'm looking forward to us holding weekend mentoring programs on our campuses. I'm looking to every brother that's on this call to come to this gathering, which I'm going to commission today. Michael Goodwin, I want to have this once a month with this brother, these brothers right here, on what are we doing to address the ills and the unbalance of equal access to education and mentoring to our young Black men in the 5 boroughs of New York City. This is not an episodic moment. This is a movement. Today, I didn't come to New York City just for an episodic moment. I came to be a change agent. But let's be real clear, change cannot happen alone. So it requires all of us. So while we will have our communications and our get-togethers within our colleges, I'm challenging our faculty and our staff, men of color, to be a part of this movement. I want each of you to be committed to coming back again. And when you come back again, bring 2 brothers with you. I'm looking for recommendations of brothers saying, Dr. Gibbs, open up your Bronx campus on Saturday morning. I got 100 young men that need to learn how to tie a tie, that need a fresh haircut, that need a suit. I need you to plug in and turn on those computers so we can teach them some artificial intelligence or robotics, or start a drone certification program, or a music studio, the arts and entertainment. I ain't forget about my sisters. Don't worry about me. Don't worry, I ain't forget about my sisters. I ain't forget about my sisters. But I got to start somewhere, because I was one of them brothers that didn't have a mentor growing up until I found one. You're talking to a brother that was in special ed up until his 10th grade in high school. Going into my 11th grade, didn't know we had a 4th floor. So, you know, this ain't just about the suit and tie. I'm telling you about when we take this off, that's where we got to start. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you, brothers. We have alums, we have recent alums, we have principals on this call that are going to add value to this discussion. Chris, thank you. Luster, thank you. Brother David, thank you. Mike, Francisco. And I don't know who this big brother is at the bottom, Mike, but he got your name, but he don't look like you. I mean, he look like you, but he don't look like you. So thank you, brothers, and to the audience. Enjoy this conversation. It's necessary, but it's bigger than us. This is just the beginning. And part of success is that you at least got to show up. And so 67 brothers and sisters have shown up to this call this evening. It's already a success. But I want to be clear, it's not about the numbers. I'll take 8 thoroughly immersed men than 80 with lukewarm enthusiasm. So I'm glad to see the immersed here this evening. Thank you very much, Mr. Goodwin. I look forward to a fruitful discussion. Congratulations to you. Let's continue to win. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, President Gibbs. Such powerful words, and something that we will definitely carry. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening as we have dialogue, or as my friends will say, chop it up, on some topics surrounding the low enrollment and retention of men of color in higher education. So before I introduce the esteemed panels, I must mention the Men of Color Committee. This group of incredible and driven men who bought into my vision and agreed to join in and helping me bringing that to fruition. Without them, this may still be just a thought on a flash drive. I first like to thank Ray McMillan, MCNY alum and job developer in the Welfare to Careers Department. Ray has been with me since day one, and that's been over 2 years. Greg Lewis, coordinator of library services and an MCNY MBA alum. Also, one of the first persons I called when I thought about this. Elliot Kerr, director of admissions and recruitment. When he heard about this initiative last year, he asked could he be part of it, and has been a crucial piece to its development. And lastly, Atla Parker, who was the panelist, So you'll hear more about his story as we move forward. Okay, let's move to the panelists. You can find their full bios on the MCNY website, so I'll keep it brief with the introductions. I'll introduce everyone first, and then we'll go into the actual panel discussion. Chris Means, Associate Head of School at Broome Academy, Charter High School, and is currently pursuing his doctoral degree in executive leadership at St. John Fisher College, where his dissertation is centered in youth development organizations and the pathways to Black male youth thriving. Shamir Steffens, who I think has my name. I think it should be changed by now. Senior Director of Recruitment for New York City Public Schools and Senior Director for New York City Men Teach. Shamir did his undergrad at Fordham University. Luster Chauncey, an MCNY alum graduating with his MSEd program, graduating from the MSEd program in 2011, and has been teaching in the DOE for, I think, over 14 years, through grades 2 to 12. He is currently the Humanities Curriculum Specialist at Urban Dove Charter School. Francisco Lazala, Cisco, another MCNY alum, graduating from the MPA program, where he currently serves as an adjunct professor. Cisco was the shift supervisor at Humanitarian Emergency Response and Relief Center. Cisco was a prominent LGBTQ advocate and founded the Gay and Lesbian Dominican Empowerment Organization. Ann Adler, my mentee, a recent graduate of the MCNY Bachelor's of Professional Studies in Human Services program. Adler is currently, as I mentioned, a Men of Color committee member and brings a wealth of experience to the table. So a quick reminder, feel free to place your comments in the chat and we will take some questions from the chat to ask the panelists at the end of the discussion. The webinar, Embracing Your Value in Higher Ed and You Belong Here. We will direct our discussion around two topics that have an impact on the experiences men of color face in the higher ed space. One, feeling a sense of belonging in higher ed, and the impact of K through 12 and what that has on higher ed enrollment. However, we are mindful of the layers that exist between these subject matters. Therefore, we may sway a bit around the issues as more is unveiled. So when I began doing research on this topic for my second master's, I found myself drawn to what young men of color encounter in the K through 12 space and its correlation to enrollment and retention in higher ed. So let's begin at the academic root and discuss some barriers that exist in the K through 12 education. First, let's throw out some data. High school graduate rate for Black males in New York City is 65 to 75%, Latino males 74%, opposite to their counterpart, white males 88%, and Asians 94%. Be mindful, Black students make up around a quarter of the city's more than 1 million public school students. However, Black instructors are disproportionately underrepresented among the faculty who teach them. Only 19% of educators in New York City's public schools are Black, and only 4% of the city's educators are Black males. We have 3 panelists that have spent years in the K through 12 space, so let's begin there. Luster, having taught in the public school system for over 14 years, what led you to that profession and what impact have you had on young men of color?
Let's see. I worked in the music industry and in advertising, and as a younger man, I had a lot of fun. I made a lot of good money, but my spirit was not satisfied with the work that I was doing. Once I approached almost 40, I thought about the fact that I have no children, and I really wanted to have an impact on the planet. And all of my volunteerism was with young people. I volunteered at my church. I taught church school. I worked with youth ministries. I taught a program at Clark Atlanta called Saturday Science. So I figured at the change of careers that I would marry my passion with my work. And while that meant taking a huge pay cut, I felt like it would satisfy my spirit more. And so I made some lifestyle changes so that I could afford to still live my life the way I like to. And I came to MCNY because I was able to get my degree in a year. And then the rest is history. The reason why I decided, though, is because of the stats that you talked about. I realized that education was important to me. I wanted to know why it was so challenging for us Black men in college. And I felt like the best way to be a part of the solution is to get in education. And so I felt like I could be I could increase those numbers, but I could also be an influence for other young Black men to follow. And I do have several young men that I've mentored who have become educators. Some of them have surpassed me in some of their goals as educators. In terms of how I impact young men of color that I work with, that's not so easy to quantify, but I do know I have an impact. I think that just being in the room, it makes a difference, whether I see it while they're with me or it manifests later in life. I do believe having Black male teachers in the classroom, not just for Black males, is very important.
I agree, and I will say this: just being there makes a difference. The first time I had a Black male instructor standing in front of me outside of my music teacher in junior high was when I went to college. And so let's look at let's go to Chris as the associate head of school, which I feel in public schools would be the vice principal, right? You fall into the 18% of Black male school administrators in New York City. In your role at a charter school that serves a student population that is 50% Black and 44% Latino, how do you feel this impacts your male students?
Yeah, yes, Michael, thanks for having me. Yeah, I am the associate head of school at Broome Street Academy Charter High School. That's a charter school language flex for assistant principal. I frame your question in the context of the fact that I had my first Black male teacher and professor just this summer. And for me, that was like seeing a unicorn because all of my schooling and post-secondary experience has been at PWIs. And so that being said, it was also an impactful educational experience because one, Dr. Gilbert Lewis is brilliant and he supported me immensely. And two, he understood me and helped me like cultivate what I'm doing in my research and helping me with my dissertation and the focus and the studies of empowering and supporting the thriving of Black male youth in America. This has led me to think about the impact that I've had on my students, having started off in the classroom as a 8th grade humanities teacher, and now as a high school leader, and especially to the community of scholars that are Black and brown. They have access to me. They have access to me, and as Dr. Gibbs said, what they see is what they'll be. And so I think that being in front of them and as Lester said, all the students, even those non-BIPOC students, what impact is that having on them seeing a Black man that is not considered a criminal, basketball player, entertainer, they get to see somebody that, when they get in positions of power or using their privilege, they're going to think about Mr. Means, maybe they will think about Mr. Means as they make any kind of decisions towards, Black and brown folks. So I think that's what that impact is that I'm having on them right now.
Most definitely. And Shamir, as the Senior Director of the New York City's Men Teach, which I understand has certified about over 5,000 men of color in the teaching profession since the year 2016. What has been your challenge engaging men of color in the K-12 system? And what do you think would make it more inviting?
Yeah, thank you, Brother Goodwin. Just first and foremost for the opportunity to be here, and President Gibbs as well. And I'm going to build off of something that you said previously when you were framing the conversation around some of the statistics, just to kind of highlight just one challenge. I know there's a number of things that we can go into, but for the sake of time, you were talking about stats, talking about like dropout rates, or what I would like to refer to as like, being forced out. Is it a dropout or is it like forced out? And I just want to paint this picture for everyone just on the call and for those who are, a part of this discussion, right? Like those were just a few data points that you mentioned that just kind of highlight some of the challenges, or what I look at as like opportunities in the work that we do. But if we think about that for a second, it makes me think about Dr. Chris Emden. He talks about this idea for some Black youth, returning to a school to teach is like returning to the scene of a crime against themselves, and how painful and traumatic and triggering some of that must be. And, he talks about how you can't do this in isolation. It has to be a part of like an entire effort to address these inequities. And so for me, and in the hat that I wear as a recruiter, something that I always share with the team when we're out and we're trying to, look for, cultivate, recruit, support, Black men to become teachers. I always say, you don't recruit someone just once, right? Especially when we're talking about, given the stats that you mentioned, a marginalized group of folks who don't appear in the space. And so thinking about that quote as well, right? It really comes down to making sure that we aren't just asking folks to sign up and to be teachers without addressing some of their own trauma, or what their experience was like, or what their K through 12 experience was like, and really thinking about that. And so that's a big challenge that doesn't oftentimes get mentioned, but it's so crucial, and it's so critical in terms of like us recruiting and letting folks know, letting men of color know that we want them, we value them, kind of like Chris mentioned. We need them. We appreciate them and respect them for their intellect and what they bring to the table, not just as disciplinarians, but really thinking about, creating, and not just saying that, but creating an environment and furthering environments that have inclusive and like equitable practices in place that support this claim, and like school cultures that really value them. And I think that's been the biggest challenge. The challenge for me in the work that I've been doing now, this is like year 10, in recruitment. It's not the men of color who are raising their hands who want to teach, because you can go outside right now and brothers are like, despite some of that trauma, like, you know what I mean? Like, I want to give back, I want to do something. But then it's like, what are we recruiting them into? What kind of school environments, what kind of buildings are they going into? Are they being glorified deans, or are they being allowed to teach and do what they need, what they've been called to do to help liberate our young people? And so that's one of the biggest challenges. Obviously, like I said, we can go into a number of things, but I think just in terms of starting there as like a root cause before we get into all the other things that really serve as like a barrier. I think really just letting folks know that we value them, and not just saying that, but we want to understand where they're coming from, where they've been, where they're at, where they're trying to go, and really trying to support them so that in doing that work for them, they in turn can do that for our young learners and their families.
I like that what you said is like their K through 12 experience. What was that like, right? And again, as we look at the shortage in the education system of men of color, and I feel I can safely say that the majority of guidance counselors and mental health counselors in the K through 12 system are women, right? And so therefore I will state a familiar African proverb: it takes a village to raise a child, right? So with that in mind, Atla, you have a strong community alliance, right? How important is mentorship, community leaders, other students people coming in collectively to kind of work with young men of color in K through 12?
Oh man, that's very, very important. I don't even think it's been spoke about enough. Just to piggyback on what Ben said, to take a village to raise a child. From K to 12, when I think about those years, I had an example of what a mentor would look like, right? African American male teacher, and then when I saw him, I was like, okay, this is really, really different, but it was really something to aspire to be. Right. However, I think mentorship is ongoing. I don't think that mentorship should only stop when you finish a particular grade or you move on. I think it's about an ongoing process in mentorship, right? Just in general, right? Because we were talking about the barriers, right, that African Americans experience, right? And those hidden barriers, the barriers that we don't talk about when we come to school, when we go to K to 12, right? And there's no food in the house, right? There's no food in the household, right? And you come to school and you're hungry, or you come to school with a bag lunch, and the counterpart come with a box lunch, right? So we don't talk about the embarrassment and the shame that we experience, right? And I think mentorship is so important because mentorship can be the eyes, right, which some of us can't see, or the voice when we can't express that I'm embarrassed to come to school like this. I'm embarrassed because my mom can't really afford to send me to school with lunch money, or whatever the case may be. So it has been really interesting experience for myself growing up in a community, right, that was, based in, if you get in trouble, that your neighbor, your mama, your mother's friend can beat you before you get to your mama, then you get a beating too, right? So it was very, very important that mentorship along the way. However, I think that it's important that when we do encounter mentors, that it has to be a relationship that is maintained, right, from the mentee as well. So I think leadership is super, super important.
Very good. And again, just looking at the community, how, people watched out for each other, right? I want to kind of go to something Shamir said, which leads me to this next question. When you said forced out, right? Research has shown that Black male high school students in the city were suspended more than twice as often as their peers in 2019. Also in 2019, the percentage of students with IEPs by ethnicity, 31% of Black students, 48% of Latino students, 6% of Asian, and 13% of white students have IEPs. That's individualized education plans, right? And that's for individuals who have some type of learning disability. So Cisco, how do you feel this impacts the graduation rate? And are implicit biases or stereotypes because they're a certain ethnicity that's still the IEP on them? How do you feel that factors in as well? Cisco, that's you.
Sorry, but first I want to thank you, Michael, for inviting me to this panel. First thing I want to say is that if you hear me a little spotty, it's because I'm currently in the Dominican Republic on vacation. So just let me know. I just want to say that first, I want to tell you that I am I'm an immigrant. I came from the Dominican Republic to the US back in 1985 when I was 14 years old. Without knowing a word of English, I was very much aware of where I wanted to be since I was very, very young. I wanted to be a teacher. Unfortunately, because of different things that happened, me coming out of the closet, me not being able to have all the amenities that other students had, I was able to learn the language very quickly. I was able to adapt to the environment that I was in. Growing up in the projects, growing up in a different environments that didn't necessarily were communities where I thought that I was going to exceed in life. But I was fortunate enough to have a mentor in high school. His name is Alan Edmond. He's still my mentor and my best friend. I was also able to have a mentor also in, like, when I went to MCNY with Professor Ed Thompson. Professor Ed Thompson, you know, I fell in love with his class, I fell in love with the school, I fell in love with every class that I was in, but the most specifically, I asked Professor Thompson to take me under his wing so that he can help me, hopefully, to achieve my dream. My dream, once again, was to teach. Again, I wasn't able to do that when I graduated from even college. My path basically was to work in the nonprofit field. I was in the nonprofit field for like 31 years. And I thought, well, I think this is the time for me to try and get into the teaching field. Professor Thompson, like I mentioned, took me under his wing for a whole year. I was an assistant to him, and through his knowledge and through his patience, I was able to be hired by MCNY back in 2020. So I want to publicly thank you, Ed Thompson, Professor Ed Thompson. I know that you're here, for all the mentorship and all and other support that you have given me throughout MCNY and also personally. But to be more specific, I think that in order for us to be able to get an increase of men of color, more specifically, men or young men that have not had the opportunity to go to college. I myself was the first person within my family to graduate from college. I was the first person to graduate with a degree, like with a master's degree. I am very proud of all the accomplishments that I have done, but one thing that I am most proud of is the fact that I have continued to teach. That's my passion. And I think that in order for us to continue to achieve success, we have to make sure that we go where the root problem is. Where are we going? How are we going to be able to increase the membership of students in our schools, more specifically MCNY, if we don't go once again to where we need to do recruitment? If we're not going to be able to do the recruitment where it's most needed, then we're not going to be able to increase those numbers. It's very, very difficult right now for us to come as a collective. I think Michael kind of mentioned that in the very beginning. And in order for us to be able to achieve success, it's not just having a simple conversation. And I know, Michael, that you have strived to have this group for the past few years, but it's for us to be proactive and be able to come together as a collective, like I said, after this meeting, and try our best to do recruitment where recruitment is needed, which are junior high schools, community colleges. I myself, I have had the great opportunity now to be hired by Hostos Community College to teach there as well. I'm already thinking about how I'm going to do recruitment from Hostos Community College into MCNY. So those are the type of thoughts that come into my head, like when it comes to being able to be successful at this, with this initiative.
Yes, and again, where do we go? Where do we get them from? How do we do that? Is important. I wanna just kind of make a couple of points before we go into the higher ed space, right? And I want to ask you this, Chris, and just give me a couple of pointers, right? How do you think K through 12 can better prepare in your position, especially as assistant principal? How do you think K through 12 can better prepare and encourage young men of color to pursue higher ed, both academically and emotionally? If you can give me like maybe three points that you feel that would help with that.
Well, Michael, I'll give you 4, and this is what I try to stress to my students. This is what I've been cultivating through my nonprofit. We have to be prepared to support our students in 4 pillars. We have to be prepared to support them in getting prepared for college. Mm-hmm. And if college is not for them, then for a trade. And if trade school is not for them, then for employment. And then the other one that, being the son of someone, of a dad who was in the military, who was then able to go and support his 3 boys and give them the life that he wanted to have us have better than what he did, which was through the military. Because we know the 5th option is the one that's most dire statistically, and that's going to lead to potential incarceration or your life being cut short. So those are the 4 emphases that I stress through the nonprofit, through school, helping develop the life skills, helping to develop the educational tools that then allow you and afford you the access to being able to go into post-secondary education.
Beautiful. And now, Lester, I want to take it to you. As Chris pointed out what K through 12 can do, give me like 3 pointers that you feel higher ed institutions can do to create a stronger bridge for K through 12 to college for men of color, making them feel welcome and helping support in that transition. Like 3 pointers that you feel that really we can do on the higher ed end.
Interesting. I was thinking about it from the same perspective as Chris, but I think some of it translates in both. One, I think that the way that we look at intelligence needs to be revisited. And so I work for Urban Dove, which is a transfer school. So I work with students who were undercredited. They came to us because they weren't successful in the normal setting. And a lot of them have low reading levels, right? So a lot of people associate the reading level with an intelligence level. So I find myself often like combating that belief. A lot of people want to treat someone with a 3rd grade reading level as though they're a 3rd grader, right? Now, I know people who might not be great readers, but they're very intelligent, right? They might not be able to write well, but they can like philosophize, right? And so if we can figure out a way not to put people into a box because of certain deficiencies, I think that'll make a big difference. Also, I think that we look at, like when I went to college, it wasn't so much I'm going for job training, right? Like college now feels like job training to students. I think they say, oh, I can get a good job without it, right? We need to figure out ways to entice people for higher education beyond just getting a good job, right? For me, going to college was about becoming mature, becoming independent, socializing, networking. And so I try to stress that to my students, that going to college is more than just about preparing you for a job. It's not trade school. And I think that if the higher eds can like get that messaging across better to younger people, I think that will help.
Good point. And so as we shift to higher ed, brief data, Black male students graduation rate, 34%, Latino males, 51%. And this is based on first-time students over a 6-year time frame. These are numbers coming from 2023. Outside of Native Americans, Black males have the lowest graduation rate, followed by Latino males. We can explore some of these issues. Going back to Black and Latino male representation as we did in elementary school, let's now look at that in high schools. I mean, in our colleges, right? Black male professors represent 3% of professors nationwide in higher ed. Latino males professors, 3% nationwide. And so again, as we look at who's standing in front of us in K through 12, then when we go to college, also it's minimal to who stands in front of us, and once we get outside, and this is again nationwide, we're not talking about, I know MCNY, that's not the case, but nationwide, that's what we're looking at, right? So Cisco, I'm going to throw it to you real quickly. And you kind of touched on this in a sense, as you mentioned, Professor Thompson, but your role as an instructor in a predominantly Black institution and going to Hostos, which is a Hispanic serving institution. And we touched, how does that make a difference for Black and Latino male college students?
Well, having a representation definitely makes a difference. I
Mhm.
think that throughout high school, for example, I didn't have no black teacher, no black teachers whatsoever.
Mhm.
In college, maybe one or two. And at MCNY, there were a few, but as far as Latinos per se, the ethnicity that I represent, as far
Mhm.
as I remember, there were none. So I think that in order for us to be successful, we have to have representation. And once again, I give thanks to MCNY for giving me the opportunity to be to basically not only represent my community, but also to be able to teach, to pursue my dream, to be able to see a student, a particular student that actually I'm not going to name. This was a student that was struggling, that I was able to mentor
Mhm.
for a few months, and this student was able to get the scholarship that is being offered like 2-3 years ago. That's just one example. I think that when I was a student, for my class, I was the only Latino queer student in my class. And I think that when you have representation, males specifically, males of color, either African American or Latinos, it does make a difference. If I wasn't able to get a male CA teacher, I think that, I mean, of course, all of us in the school, especially the teachers that I had, like Professor Boyce, for example, these were professors that care. These were professors that went out of their way to be able to accommodate the many needs of all the students that they had. But when you had two male students in Professor Tansom's class, one actually dropped out after the first semester. I was the only Latino male, and then there was another African student. We, out of the whole class for that year, there were only maybe like, probably remember 5 to 6 students, and the rest are females.
Mhm.
Love my female colleagues, female students, some of the friends now, but in order for us to once again affect change, we have to have representation
And again, in both arenas, right?
in both arenas. Yes, thank
Both
you.
arenas.
Michael, if I
Chris.
may, really quickly, because something Francisco said sparked for me. So I went to Clark Atlanta University for undergrad. I went to
I know that.
MCNY for grad. I went to private school in New York when I was younger, and so I've had Black representation throughout. So when
Right.
you ask me what can higher ed do, I had that experience. I had Black male teachers, Black female teachers, teachers who invested in me in college, and even though I achieved good grades, there were social things that they helped me through so that I could maintain stay in college.
I want to thank you for saying that, because then we look at the HBCUs, right? Where again, it's more culturally sound with respect to that, right? But then when you go to the PWIs, and now I want to take it to you, Chris, because you attended two prestigious PWIs, Indiana University and NYU, for your master's. And can you briefly describe your experience around inclusion? NYU has 2.8% Black and 6% Latino. When I stress that, because New York University is in the heart of New York City, right? And we still only have close to 3% Black and 6% Latino at NYU. Now I know at NYU they have a Black student university union, rather. Indiana University, they have a Black student union. I don't know if he was involved in any of that, but just kind of give me like a brief, like, what was that like for you being in the PWI environment?
Yeah, so yeah, when you're at those institutions where you got, almost 50,000 students, and 2 to 4% of them or black and brown, you don't really get to see a lot of you on campus. And so you have to find your sources. And I personally access them through the Black Student Union and then through the D9 organizations. I'm a proud member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. So that was founded at Indiana University for that particular reason, that there were 10 men who didn't have and didn't see one another across the campus. So that is those are the ways that you then start in higher ed to like develop that navigational capital, that social capital to support you against those, those systemic situations that, will tend to try to slow you down. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the union, because here again, MCNY, even though it's a PWI, I mean, even at, I'm sorry, Metropolitan College of New York, even though it's a PWI, we're still looking as men of color, still looking to bring some kind of unity, even with us in this setting, right? Now I want to go to Shamir, because you also attended a PWI, and that was at Fordham. And again, they have a Black Student Alliance. Fordham, again, in New York City, 6% Black, 14% Latino. So even though we feel it's in the city, but we're still looking at the disparities within the colleges right in the heart of New York City. So how was that, how was that experience for you?
Yeah. And as Chris was talking, I'm gonna build off of something that he mentioned and actually go back and kind of answer this question and the one before around the partnerships piece and like what higher education institutions can do, because I feel like it's tied into my response for this question. In terms of like what I think higher ed can do and what I found solace in even being at Fordham is just what we're doing today. So shout out to you, Brother Goodwin, just holding spaces to have conversations, whether they're virtual, whether they're in person. We talk about things like affinity group spaces. I think that mentorship piece is so crucial, right? Like that bridge program. We talked about the high school students. So as they're transitioning into undergrad, having those like summer bridge programs and connecting them with mentors and just how crucial that is and just really trying to build community. So just wanted to just plant that there. But something that Chris said, I'm like, look, I'm gonna keep it all the way real with you guys on this call tonight. The crazy thing about it is I grew up in the Bronx. I grew up in one of like poorest congressional districts in the country, in the Bronx, and the projects in Cedric houses, which was only a few miles from Fordham University, which sparked my interest to want to go there. Sort of like this internal thing to say, like, man, we got this school right in the heart of the borough, but there aren't people that look like me, right? And so it's so crazy because one of the things that, to build off of what Chris said, that I don't think a lot of folks talk about, and I just wanted to highlight, is that imposter syndrome and how big of a thing that is. There's a quote I pulled from a book called Ratchetdemic, again by Chris Emden, and he's talking about imposter syndrome, and he says, mostly experienced by high-functioning people from historically marginalized groups in academic and professional spaces that were not necessarily designed for them. It causes brilliant people to be paralyzed by what they perceive to be their deficiencies, even when these deficiencies don't really exist. And so I remember going to Fordham, growing up in the Bronx, and saying, man, this is not too far from where I grew up, but like none of these folks look like me. In addition to none of these folks looking like me, I had freshmen, right? While I was taking the train and the bus to get to campus, the students were driving Audis, Mercedes, BMWs, right? And like, forget the academic piece. I was already trying to figure out who I was and where I stand in terms of this place of being on this campus. And so I think a lot of that plays into, to the question and thinking about like what that experience was like. And so for me, it's interesting. It wasn't through the Black Student Alliance, though where I'm going to name where I found community at, because I feel like that's the response to it, was really in like a commuter lounge, because I didn't live on campus because I couldn't afford to live in the dorms. And so we had a commuter lounge for students who were commuters, and there was a pool table there. We would hang there after school or in between classes. For me, I had a job, so I'd have to run off campus to go to work and then go home. And honestly, in that space was where I was able to have conversations with Black and Latino students just like myself who were on the campus, who didn't have a car, who didn't come from wealth. And we were able to just build community and find solace and refuge in one another. And so just wanted to highlight the last thing I'll say about this. I just want to make one quick point. Even in the work that we do with NYC Men Teach to recruit more male educators of color, I remember back in, so we had a goal to get 1,000 men of color in the teaching profession by 2018. And we started in 2016. And I remember we met that goal, but fast forward in 2021, we saw 815 men of color become full-time teachers of record within New York City public schools. And if you guys remember the context during that time, this is during COVID. This is during George Floyd. Many of us were home. We witnessed what was happening. And I remember thinking to myself, how am I going to meet these numbers to recruit men of color when like all this stuff is going on? And oddly enough, we didn't talk about recruitment. We didn't talk about them teaching. We just opened up spaces for folks to talk, just to relate, to have conversations. And so fast forward to be able to see that many men of color become teachers had nothing to do with anything that we did or any secret sauce or any magic. But again, it's just meeting, and I think President Gibbs mentioned this in the chat, meeting folks where they're at, going back to what I said initially when we started, hearing their stories, really empathizing with them, understanding what they need, and trying to support them. Because in doing that, like healing work for men of color who are we're trying to get to teach or come into higher institutions, they then in turn can turn around and do that for their students, but it has to start with them first. And so just wanted to highlight that.
Powerful. And imposter syndrome, I was going to do a whole seminar on that, right? Because as we look at getting into the spaces that are identified in higher ed as being prestigious, as being the places that we, oh my God, we go to this college or this college, and we can get in. But then do we feel like we belong there? And then are we now questioning our own level of intelligence, or then you also have the other piece where it comes to the socioeconomic piece, right? Wow, I'm taking the bus to the campus and these guys are pulling up and Audis and Lexus and so on and so forth. Or, how do I feel, right? Do I feel I belong here? All right. And that's another piece that we always have to factor into the equation, I want to kind of bring it to Atla, who is, a MCNY student. And as we look at sense of belonging in PWIs, but also the sense of belonging can also fall outside of PWIs. And as President Gibbs mentioned, the female to male ratio here at MCNY, and that's common around the country, right? And so MCNY, 71, I have 69 to 30. So let's say 70 to 30% ratio. And so that's a piece. And then everyone doesn't come into higher ed the traditional way. We don't all go from high school to higher ed, right? So I want to bring that to Atla, whose story is similar to mine. We completed our undergrad at a much later age. And I remember when Atla first met me, sitting outside my office in the lounge. How is that for you? Coming into, higher ed, we look at imposter syndrome, we look at do I belong, we look at the ratio to men to women. And now at a certain age, it's like, wow, how do I, because I know how I felt when I came in here. I'm like, wow, like, is this someplace I fit, right? I was like, oh my God, I got to be a student again, right? So for you, Atla, how was that?
Oh man, that feeling, as I'm on this panel right now, that feeling that comes up for me again, right? Coming into a man of a particular age, and I walked in, man, and I said exactly what you said. Do I belong here? However, it was the drive, right? It was the experience, right? Being the first male in my family to graduate college, being much more than just actually going to the school, knowing that being there, I was going to be the example of my nieces and my nephews and family members that don't even have a higher didn't get a diploma, didn't get a GED, didn't get anything like that, but I was going to be the example. So what happened was all the feelings that I had coming in there thinking, wait, do I belong? It was important for me to change my mindset in the moment. It was important for me to gather the support system that I was going to need when I experienced that. Do I need to be here? Those moments when I was in class and I looked to my left and the student next to me can be my daughter and or my son. So I would look to the left, and I had to change that perception when I was there, because I said to myself, okay, Atla, you are here to learn, right? And you can't focus on the students next to you that might be a little bit more computer savvy than you, because what you're going to say is that you might know the computer, but I know life. So let's talk about that together and we can start to work together. So the changing of the mindset while I was there, helped me, man. But it was important that I acknowledge the fact that I'm there, man. And no matter how old I was, that education was still possible, that I couldn't count myself out because people were already counting me out. So I had to continue to count myself in, and understood that education didn't have an age factor. And and what I had to realize was this, that the enemy is the enemy. Listen, I can tell myself some self-defeating things, man, and I had to cancel those thoughts out, man. And it was something about building the support network within the college, man. It was important to have people that were going to advocate for me, people that were going to cheer me on and tell me you can do it. But most importantly, it was important that I changed the mindset, because it really didn't matter of the age, man. What mattered was my perseverance to pursue something that I needed that was bigger than me. Right. My education is bigger than me. I am the example that people need to see. I'm clear about that. In my neighborhood, when I'm going to school with my book bag, man, the guys outside, they say, hey, you going to school? I say, I sure am, man. And on the low, they will pull me to the side and they say, hey, what school you go to? Right. So I know it's bigger than me, man. I am the example that people need to see, man. So it was an experience. Most importantly, it was important that I had the support of others. However, I had to build that support, and I had to tell myself, stop the defeating thoughts, right? Tell yourself that you can, opposed to that you can't, man, and don't be intimidated, right? Understand that you have to change your perception, right? Because if I could change the way that I think, I could change the way that I feel. And I began to do that, man. And these are the results right now.
I can't. I mean, powerful. You're never too old to learn, right? We can't let outside forces dictate what we do. We can't let outside forces dictate what our dreams should be. We can't let outside forces determine our path, right? And as we look at higher ed and men of color in higher ed, there's so many socioeconomic factors that come into play that we battle with, that we struggle through, and then we tend to push education to the side. We begin to say, you know what, that's not as important to me right now. I need this, but understanding that with that, I can get this and more, right? And that's where sometimes we have to shift the mindset, right? So looking at the time, what I want to do, and brothers, powerful everything you said. We looked at the K-12 system. We looked at the lack of representation in there. We looked at some of the challenges with respect to the labeling. We looked at some of the challenges with respect to the bridging. How do we move forward? How do we move them forward? Higher ed, again, representation, belonging, trying to see if we go to those elite schools, but what do we deal with as we go into those schools? Representation on both ends. And also dealing with even if we're in the PWIs, it's still PBIs and HBCUs, it's still the gender variance, right? We're still going to be at a majority as a male, right? And with respect to that. So all that. So what I want to do right now is I want to just take a couple of questions from the audience that was sent to me. I have one question, I think, from Donovan Crosby. How do we get all the stakeholders, parents, Black male, policymakers, educators, administrators to buy in and close the disproportionate gap in higher ed? Who wants to tackle that question?
One of the things that I'm studying is a theoretical framework that's called community cultural wealth. And in that, it talks about the multiple layers of family, talks about navigational capital, linguistic capital, social capital. So there's all these multiple forms of capital that you need to support you, as in what Atla was saying, is imposter syndrome is a systemic racist point of view that impacts us because we are not supposed to be here. This is what we're told, we're not supposed to be here. But guess what? As Atlas said, when you shift that mentality, when you have that support network, then you do understand every step of the way you have made it. Every step of the way you have worked really hard to get there. So when you actually do arrive, you have to understand that you belong here. And then, as a good friend of mine, often says, then you go back and each one teach one. Then you go back and give a hand back and pull up. And I think that, this affinity group right now and what we're talking about and everything that we're discussing, and, I've looked at the chat, how do you survive in a predominantly white institution? How do you survive? It starts with us. It starts with us, and then we go into the community, and then we support and help lift up our young folks so that they go back. And the more people, those percentages go from 1% to 4% to 5%. And it's not an easy road, but this is where it starts and this is where it begins.
Yeah, it starts with us, right? And with that, a question from Sandra Davenport. How do we identify the deserts that need to be irrigated? How are people of color identifying who are qualified to be in position to do so? I want to take that question and look at how are we putting people in position and who are the people that should be in position? How are we taking the people from one position and putting them into change-making situations that can really bring about some change in this educational system that I feel truthfully is faulty. But I said that, right? It's skewed. It's skewed a certain way, and trying to achieve in the system, sometimes that wasn't built for us. How do we do that? Shamir, I want to throw that to you.
I'm laughing because I said, man, I'm a slow process. I need some time. Hopefully he don't come to me. But the funny thing also is Sandra, who asked the question, we work together.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure if she's still on the call. But if you are, Sandra, I'm gonna get you when this call's over. But I think so first I wanted to point out something because this is being mentioned in the chat, is I think that there are when we talk about being Chris talked about, and someone sort of voiced their opinion in the chat about like we belong in these spaces, and then someone mentioned like, hey, but we're meant to feel like we don't, and that's real, right? That's very real. So I just want to acknowledge that, but also to say that when we talk about being disruptors, when we talk about about liberation, when we talk about education, like there are many ways that folks can tackle this. I think when I was younger in this space, I always felt like liberation and sort of and being a disruptor had to look like this. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think all of us have different skills, abilities, and I think that that's what makes the beauty of what we do so awesome, right? Is that we can come together as a collective and really say like, hey, Chris is over here trying to impact change. Atlas over here trying to impact change. Cisco, Luster's trying to impact change over here, right? And like what we want is the same thing, right? We want to see schools that have representation in terms of like our young people. Like I have two young Black boys, 10 and 13. And I'll be honest, I had both my kids in private school. I live out in North Jersey. And then I realized I was like, you know what? Just looking at the school and looking at how things were unfolding, I'm like, this doesn't serve me. This doesn't serve my family. So essentially, it's like I'm paying for my own oppression. In some of the instances, we don't have time to go into like what was going on. And so, again, I say all that to say that it really comes down to us checking our egos. It really comes down to us working together. It comes down to not having like that Christopher Columbus complex in terms of like, which we know for a fact already, he didn't discover anything, but like who discovered it first, right? And so it's not about like who's right as much as it's about what's right, right? And for me, at the end of the day, it's about our young people. It's about our students. We know what the stats say, right? When there isn't representation, but we know the opposite is true because we've seen the data when students do have people in front of them who look like them and what that does for academic gains, for social emotional gains, for self-esteem. And so really just being able to have that and keep that at the center of what we do, I think is really, really crucial and really important, and just making sure that we are not going against one another, but really trying to work together in whatever spaces we're in to really impact change in the ways that we think will be best. And a lot of that is not just what we think will be best, but again, what is it that our young people need? What is it that families that we're engaging with, what do they need, rather than just us coming to them and saying like, hey, someone mentioned in the chat around education, like, we're not colonizers. We're not coming and saying these people are uncivilized, don't have religion. We're like, no, we're celebrating the diversity of our young people and helping them to draw that out, to celebrate that in these spaces. In New York City, 85% of our 1 million students identify as students of color, right? Over 200 different languages spoken. And so we want to have educators that represent the diversity of our students, because we know that what that will do, for them in terms of, again, not just academically, but them just being global citizens in this ever-changing world. So.
And I do want to just throw something in, and then I'm going to go to the part where each one of you can say some closing remarks specifically. But Shamir, I want to thank you because MCNY, we do have our MSEd program, which Lester is a graduate of, and meeting with us and Dr. Ainello about how can we begin to bring more students, from the K through 12 system into college to produce more teachers. Because the part that we always have to understand, in order for them to get into the K through 12 space, they still have to go through the college part, and if we don't have enough in college and we don't have enough graduating out of college, it's hard to get them in that space, right? So we need to make sure that cycle takes place to continue to bring them in that space. So I want to do this as we're getting close to I just want to give you each like a one-liner or something you can say with respect to, we covered a lot of information, something you can say that we can go away with as a results to the higher ed, the low retention and graduation rate in higher ed.
I think I'll say it's really not about who's who in higher education. It's about who's helping who.
Good. You got it,
Speaking
Joe.
speaking from the teacher standpoint, K through 12, I think it's important that we fill roles that have a lot of weight, right? So we've got school leaders, but like my job created the specialist position, right? There's the humanities specialist and the STEM specialist. And for me, it came with a pay cut. And I had to toil with whether I was willing to do that again in my life. But what brought me around to it was remembering, one, why I got an education. It wasn't for money, obviously. And then when I reminded myself of why I got into education, then I thought about what the weight was for the position, right? I'm responsible for the content that our students use in ELA and humanities. For me, that's a huge responsibility, and it was worth the pay cut because I didn't want anyone else to do it. I'm the only Black person on the central management team for curriculum and instruction. I don't think that is as much as those people try to be culturally sensitive. They have to make the effort to be, whereas for me, it's more natural. So I needed to be in that position, even for the pay cut. So I say all that to say, if we're going to be in education, especially now as Black men, it can't be just because we need a job or just because we want money. It has to be for the passion of it, and that has to drive how we move in the job.
Be in it for the right reasons, right? Be in it for the right reasons. If you're gonna be in it for the right reasons. All right, we're getting short on time, so just hit me with something. Cisco, hit me with something real quick so I can move it on and we go.
But I would say it's like one thing that we rarely talk about is how expensive school is.
Okay.
It's how we need to make sure that there are scholarships available for our students to be able to afford to go to all these different colleges. I think that if we're able to do that, that's one. And two, if we're able to communicate with guidance counselors specifically from various high schools within New York City and other places, we will be able to increase the attendance rate in our different schools, especially at MCNY. I have more ideas, but I'll leave it there.
Awesome.
I'll go.
Finances, being it for the right reasons, Atla mindset, right? Chris, Getch, throw it at me.
I'll say as a collective and everybody that's who has tuned in on this, collectively, for we are not here to play, dream, or drift. We have hard work to do and loads to lift. Shun not the struggle, for it is God's gift, and we have to be strong.
It's a task we can do, but we must be mindful. It's not a task that's easy. Shamir, one more.
Yeah, sorry. I thought I talked enough the last one, so I was creating some space. But I say just go back to what I said before, right? That quote that says, "If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together." And so I'd say the same thing. Again, we are more powerful when we check our egos, when we work together, right? And we're able to do this work as a collective for just the betterment of all of our young people and our communities. And so that's what I would just say. Whatever our cause is, whether it's through instruction, whether it's through leadership, whether it's through recruitment, just really thinking about how we can work together to be able to make a difference. And so that's what I'm committed to, and I'm grateful to be in this space tonight with so many other brothers and women on the call who are, doing the same. And I hope that we can extend this just beyond these squares that we're in or rectangles that we're in, and really think about ways, just like Brother Goodwin, you mentioned, and Brother President Gibbs, to how we can really start to see some change and some boots to the ground. So I'm really excited about the opportunity.
Awesome. So, again, thank you, fellas. Just want to do closing remarks and so again, creating the Men of Color Affinity Group was birthed from my experience as a student and a professor regarding the small number of men at the college. and how we spread it and how we're spread across multiple degree programs, truthfully with very little contact or connections with each other. Also, with the large number of women in the student body here, there were no male-centered activities taking place. I interviewed 2 male students for my research, and one student said, we need a man cave, a place where we can come together to connect, build, and support one another. So to my knowledge, for the first time in a 60-plus year history at MCNY, this is the first time something of this magnitude will take place. The Men of Color Affinity Group, we have 3 components. It's About Us group discussion, which we're going to meet monthly, where we can get together, build, look at male-focused topics. We're going to have another component, we walk together, where current students and alumni can connect and work with each other. We have another portion that's going to be building the future, where members of the Affinity Group will speak with young men of color in high school and youth programs to share our experiences and speak about the benefits of higher ed in their future. Our first in-person meeting, It's About Us, will be held on October 21st at the Manhattan campus in the Student Lounge. This is open to all MCNY male students, alum, faculty, and staff. The registration link should be in the chat and posted throughout the college. If you are not part of MCNY, part of the MCNY family, but want some involvement, please contact me at menofcolor@mcny.edu. You can be a resource, guest speaker, community partner for future collaborations. And what Shamir is saying, we build together. Chris, yes, the task may be hard, but it's going to be not as difficult if we build together, right? We have to always be mindful of that. It's not just what I can do by myself, what we can do together. So in closing, I would like to thank, all the panelists for what you shared, your experience, knowledge. I hope that everyone else in attendance, that the time spent here was insightful, empowering. I want to thank David Hahn, Tina Giorgio, Kenya Kirkland for all your behind the scenes assistance. I want to give thanks to, there are a ton of MCNY faculty and staff, when I made mention of this going back a few years ago, who said, Mike, that's a great idea. What do you want? What do you need from me? How can I help? How can I be part of this? And as we help and continue to develop the students here at MCNY, the male students of color at MCNY, we will be reaching out to the various departments, academic affairs, the library, like all the learning center, all the components to help these individuals get through this process together. And that's what this is all about. I want to give thanks to President Gibbs, because it was him who helped move this forward, but I can't, not thank, those who I put it in front of before and was trying to help me move this forward. So again, it's been a pleasure having you all. I appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to share share on this topic with us. And again, I hope it was insightful. I hope it brought about an awareness and some thoughts. And what are you going to do to make the difference? It doesn't matter your gender. It doesn't matter where you work, but you are part of the community. And that we touched on in our discussion, it was about the community. What can you do in your community to help make a difference? What can you do in your community to help lift one of the young men, to help put them in the right direction? What can you do to be a part of this change? I hereby throw that task on you. All right, so on behalf of MCNY, Metropolitan College of New York, we thank you all, President Gibbs, and the board, and all the faculty, staff, students, alumni, everyone who came out. And again, to everyone, just overall, we appreciate you. And panelists, again, thank you so much. I am so appreciative for what you were able to do this evening. And with that, thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Michael.
All right, thank you. Have a good evening.
Hi, guys.
Good evening, guys.
Thank you.